It was 4:12 a.m. when Maria Donovan's phone rang. The university housing director's voice was grave on the other end. "Mrs. Donovan, I'm afraid there's been a fire at your son's dormitory." Time stopped. "We haven't been able to locate Thomas." Maria clutched her chest as the words echoed through her kitchen. The blue light from the refrigerator cast shadows across her face as she stood frozen, still holding the glass of water she'd gotten up for. Down the hall her husband James slept, unaware their world was about to shatter. Thomas Donovan had been the center of Maria's universe since the moment she first held him, a quiet, thoughtful boy with eyes that seemed to see right through you. His acceptance to Princeton had been the proudest moment of their lives. "He's going to change the world," James had said at Thomas's high school graduation. They never imagined he'd vanish from it instead. The family photos lining the hallway told the story of their life together. Thomas at 7, missing his front teeth, grinning widely by the lake at their summer cottage. Thomas at 12, serious-faced but proud, holding up a science fair trophy. Thomas at 18, tall and handsome in his graduation gown, looking toward the horizon, toward the future that now lay in ashes. "We need you to come to campus immediately," the housing director continued. "The fire department is still searching." Maria and James made the 3-hour drive to Princeton in silence, the headlights cutting through the darkness as dawn approached. They passed other cars on the highway, ordinary people heading to ordinary jobs, lives untouched by tragedy. Maria found herself hating them for their normalcy, then immediately feeling ashamed. When they arrived on campus, the acrid smell of smoke hung in the air. Police barricades surrounded what remained of Whitman Hall. Maria could see the blackened windows, the charred walls, the water still dripping from the building's skeleton. Firefighters moved through the ruins, their yellow coats stark against the grey debris. "5 students are unaccounted for," the dean told them in a makeshift crisis center in the gymnasium. Other parents sat on folding chairs, some crying, some staring blankly ahead. "Recovery efforts are ongoing. We're asking families to provide DNA samples to help with identification." The word recovery hit Maria like a physical blow. Not rescue, recovery. It took 3 days to confirm what the authorities already suspected. 5 students had perished in the fire, trapped in their rooms by the rapidly spreading flames. Thomas's room, 312, had been directly above where the fire originated. "He likely never woke up," the fire chief said gently. "The smoke would have been too thick." The only mercy was that there was no body. The fire had burned so hot that only fragments remained, barely enough for DNA testing. The funeral was a closed casket affair, the coffin containing only Thomas's high school letter jacket, his favorite books, and photographs. Maria couldn't bear the thought of an empty box, but couldn't stand the idea of not having a funeral at all. Her son deserved to be mourned. 500 people came to the service. Thomas had been well liked, a brilliant student with a quiet demeanor but a sharp wit that emerged once you got to know him. His roommate, who had been away for the weekend when the fire occurred, spoke about Thomas's kindness. His professors praised his intellect. His childhood friends shared memories of growing up together. After everyone left, after the casseroles stopped arriving, after the sympathy cards were read and put away, the silence descended. The Donovan house, once filled with laughter and debate and music, became a mausoleum to grief. James threw himself into work. Maria quit her job as an elementary school teacher. She couldn't bear the sight of other people's children thriving while her own was gone. "It gets easier," people promised. They lied. The first year was a fog of pain. Maria found herself walking into Thomas's bedroom, untouched since he left for college, expecting to find him at his desk. She would pick up the phone to call him before remembering. Once she bought his favorite cereal at the grocery store out of habit, then sat on the kitchen floor crying when she realized what she'd done. The second year, the sharp edges of grief began to dull slightly. Not because the pain lessened, but because Maria had learned to live around it. She joined a support group for parents who had lost children. The circle of folding chairs in the church basement became her lifeline, the only place where people understood the peculiar horror of outliving your child. "I keep his room exactly the same," Maria confessed during one meeting. "James thinks it's unhealthy, but I can't bear to change it." "My daughter's been gone 8 years, an older woman named Eleanor responded. "Her room is still the same. Do what you need to do. There's no right way to grieve." By the 3rd year, Maria had developed a routine. She volunteered at the hospital 3 days a week. She tended a small garden in the backyard, growing Thomas's favorite flowers. She visited his grave every Sunday, rain or shine, replacing the flowers and telling him about her week as if he could hear. James rarely joined her. His grief had taken a different shape. He couldn't bear the cemetery, the tangible reminder of their loss. On the anniversary of the fire each year, Maria and James received phone calls from the parents of the other victims. They had formed a bond in the aftermath, these 5 families united by tragedy. They rarely saw each other in person. It was too painful, the missing presence at each family gathering too obvious. But they checked in, making sure no one was drowning. Princeton established a memorial scholarship in the names of the 5 students. Each year, Maria and James attended the ceremony honoring the recipients. Maria would sit stiffly in her chair, watching these bright young faces, so full of promise, just as Thomas had been. She was happy for them truly, but each ceremony reopened the wound. In the 4th year after the fire, James was offered a job in Seattle. "It might be good for us," he suggested carefully. "A fresh start," Maria refused. "I can't leave him," she said, though she knew rationally that Thomas wasn't in the cemetery. Thomas wasn't anywhere. The strain on their marriage, already fragile from grief, intensified. James took the job and commuted back on weekends. The distance grew between them, not just geographically but emotionally. They moved around each other like ghosts, haunting the same house but living separate lives. "Do you think we'll ever be happy again?" Maria asked James on the 5th anniversary of the fire. He looked at her for a long moment. "I think we'll be okay. That's the most I can promise." It wasn't enough. By the 6th year, James had moved to Seattle permanently. The divorce was amicable, as divorces go. Neither blamed the other. They had simply grown in different directions in their grief, like trees bending away from a storm. Maria kept the house in New Jersey. She couldn't bear to sell it, not with all the memories it held. Every corner contained some echo of Thomas. The height marks on the kitchen doorframe, the dent in the living room wall from when he was learning to juggle, the treehouse in the backyard now slowly rotting away. She began to think of her life in terms of before and after. Before the fire and after the fire. She was a different person now, harder in some ways, softer in others, more fragile but also more resilient. She had survived what she once thought would kill her. 7 years after the fire, Maria agreed to go on a date with a man from her book club. Robert was kind and gentle, a widower who understood grief. The date went well enough, but as they stood on her porch at the end of the evening, Maria knew she wouldn't see him again. "I'm not ready," she told her friend Susan the next day. "It's been 7 years," Susan replied gently. "Thomas would want you to be happy." "How would you know what Thomas would want?" Maria snapped, then immediately apologized. Susan had been nothing but supportive. It wasn't her fault that no one could possibly understand the hole Thomas had left behind. 8 years after, Maria found herself at loose ends. The volunteering wasn't enough anymore. The garden couldn't fill her days. On the advice of her therapist, she had finally started seeing someone in the 7th year. She enrolled in classes at the local community college, art history. Something she'd always been interested in but never pursued. To her surprise, she enjoyed it. The immersion in beauty after so many years of darkness felt like coming up for air after being underwater. She began to visit museums, to travel a little. She went to Italy on a guided tour for art lovers and found herself laughing at a fellow traveler's jokes. The sound of her own laughter startled her. It had been so long since she'd heard it. It was 9 years after the fire when everything changed again. Maria had reluctantly joined Instagram at the urging of her niece. "It's a good way to keep in touch," Lily had insisted, "and you can follow all those art museums you love." Maria didn't post much herself, but she did enjoy seeing Lily's photos and the museum accounts she followed. She was still learning how to navigate the app, often confused by its features. That confusion led to the moment that would shatter her world for the second time. It was a Tuesday afternoon, rainy and grey. Maria was scrolling through her feed, looking at photos from the Metropolitan Museum of Art's new exhibition, when her finger slipped. Instead of scrolling down, she tapped on a recommended account, something the app was always pushing at her. The profile belonged to someone called Nomad Artist 47, a photographer who captured stark, beautiful images of remote landscapes. Maria was about to navigate back to her feed when a particular photo caught her eye. It showed a small wooden cabin against the backdrop of snow-capped mountains. Something about the composition was familiar. She tapped on the image to enlarge it. In the corner of the cabin's window, barely visible, was a reflection. A man's face, bearded and older, but unmistakable. Thomas. Maria's phone clattered to the floor. Her hands shook violently as she bent to retrieve it, afraid the image would be gone when she looked again. But it was still there, her son's face, older but alive, looking out from a cabin window somewhere in what appeared to be the mountains of what looked like Canada or Alaska. "It's not possible," she whispered to the empty room. Thomas had died in that fire. They had confirmed it with DNA. There had been a funeral, a grave she had visited every Sunday for 9 years. And yet, with trembling fingers, she navigated to the profile of Nomad Artist 47. There were hundreds of photos, landscapes mostly, no selfies, no clear images of people. The bio was sparse. Finding beauty in remote places, prints available upon request. Maria spent hours scrolling through every image, searching for another glimpse of the face in the reflection. She found none. But what she did find were clues. A bookshelf in the background of one photo with titles she could just make out. Books Thomas had loved. A chess set with pieces arranged in a particular pattern Thomas had always favored as an opening move. A mug with Princeton's logo, partially obscured but recognizable to a mother's eye. It was 3 a.m. when Maria finally set down her phone. Her mind was racing with impossible thoughts. Could Thomas have survived somehow? Could there have been a mistake with the DNA testing? Or was she simply seeing what she desperately wanted to see, finding patterns where none existed because grief had finally driven her to madness? She called James the next morning, something she rarely did these days. "I think Thomas might be alive," she said without preamble. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for so long that Maria thought they might have been disconnected. "Maria," James finally said, his voice gentle in the way people speak to the unstable. "We need to talk about your medication." "I'm not hallucinating," she insisted. "I found something. On Instagram. I'll send you the link." James agreed to look, though Maria could hear the concern in his voice. He thought she was having a breakdown. Perhaps she was. But an hour later, James called back. "I see the resemblance," he said cautiously. "But Maria, it's been 9 years, and we had confirmation. The DNA can be faked," Maria interrupted, surprised at her own words. When had she become someone who believed in conspiracies? And yet, the face in the window haunted her. "I need to know for sure. What are you planning to do?" James asked, alarm evident in his tone. "I'm going to message this account, and if that doesn't work—" Maria trailed off, the idea forming even as she spoke. "I'll find him." "Maria, please, think about this. If, and it's an enormous if, Thomas somehow survived that fire, he's been hiding for 9 years. He let us believe he was dead. He watched us grieve. Why would he do that unless he wanted to disappear?" The question hit Maria like a slap. Why indeed? What could drive a beloved son to fake his own death, to cause his parents such unimaginable pain? "I don't know," she admitted, "but I need answers." Maria composed dozens of messages to Nomad Artist 7 before finally sending one. She kept it simple, casual, not revealing the earthquake happening in her heart. "Beautiful photography. I'm particularly drawn to the cabin in the mountains. Where was that taken?" She waited 3 days for a response, checking her phone obsessively, barely sleeping. None came. She sent another message and another. The account remained silent. On the 5th day, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The account had been deleted. No trace of Nomad Artist 7 remained on Instagram. "He knows," Maria whispered, standing alone in her kitchen. "He saw my message and he ran." James flew in from Seattle that weekend. He had been worried enough by their conversations to come see her in person. They sat at the kitchen table where they had once shared family meals, now just 2 people connected by loss and confusion. "I spoke with Dr. Levine," James said, referring to the therapist Maria had been seeing. "She's concerned about you." "Did you show her the photo?" Maria demanded. "Yes, she agrees there's a resemblance, but Maria, the human mind is powerful. We see what we want to see. Pattern recognition is heightened when we're looking for something specific." Maria stood up from the table. "I'm not crazy, James. That was Thomas." James reached across the table to take her hand. "I'm not saying you're crazy. I'm saying you're grieving, still, and that's okay. But chasing ghosts isn't healthy." Maria pulled her hand away. "What if he's not a ghost? What if our son is out there alive and we've spent 9 years mourning an empty grave? James had no answer for that. After he left, Maria made a decision. The resemblance might have been coincidental. The deleted account might have been unrelated to her messages. But she couldn't live with uncertainty. Not again. The cabin in the photo had distinctive features: a peculiar roofline, a stonework chimney, mountains in the background that a geographer might recognize. Maria began researching. She spent hours online comparing the mountain range to known landscapes. She narrowed it down to the Canadian Rockies, possibly near Banff or Jasper National Park. She booked a flight to Calgary for the following week. Susan tried to talk her out of it. "This is a wild goose chase," she argued. "Even if the cabin is there, what are the chances this person is Thomas? And what are the chances you'll find one cabin in thousands of square miles of wilderness?" Maria was unmoved. "I have to try." The flight to Calgary was long, giving Maria too much time to doubt herself. What if James and Susan were right? What if grief had finally broken her grip on reality? But every time doubt crept in, she pulled up the saved image on her phone. She had taken screenshots before the account disappeared and looked at the face in the window. Thomas. She would know her son anywhere. Calgary was cold, the autumn air crisp and biting. Maria rented a car and checked into a modest hotel on the outskirts of town. She had a plan, of sorts. She would drive to Banff, show the photograph around, see if anyone recognized the cabin or its inhabitant. It was a long shot, but it was all she had. The first 2 days were discouraging. Banff was a tourist town, and most people she spoke with were visitors like herself. The few locals were polite but unhelpful. No one recognized the cabin from the photograph. On the third day, Maria drove further into the park, stopping at ranger stations and small outposts. At a tiny coffee shop in a village near Lake Louise, she finally got a break. The barista, an older woman with silver hair and kind eyes, studied the photo carefully. "This looks like one of the artist cabins," she said. "Up near Moraine Lake. They're rentals for artists who want solitude. Very remote. No electricity, just wood stoves and propane." Maria's heart raced. "Do you know who might be staying there now?" The woman shook her head. "The rentals are managed by a company in Calgary. Very private. Some artists don't want to be disturbed." It was a lead, however tenuous. Maria thanked the woman profusely and drove back to Calgary that evening, her mind spinning with possibilities. The rental company was called Wilderness Retreats. Their office was in a modern building downtown, all glass and steel. Maria had not called ahead. She feared they wouldn't see her without an appointment. She was right. "I'm sorry, but Mr. Keegan is fully booked today," the receptionist informed her. "Perhaps next week?" Maria couldn't wait that long. She sat in the lobby, pretending to read a magazine, watching people come and go. At lunch, she followed a group of employees to a nearby cafe. Eavesdropping shamelessly, she learned that someone named David was the manager who handled the artist cabins. The next morning, Maria returned to the office and asked for David specifically. The receptionist seemed surprised but made a call. A few minutes later, a young man with a neat beard and fashionable glasses appeared. "How can I help you?" he asked. Maria had prepared her story carefully. "I'm interested in renting one of your artist cabins," she began. "Specifically, I was hoping for one near Moraine Lake. A photographer friend stayed in one recently and recommended it highly." She showed him the photo on her phone. "This one, if it's available." David studied the image. "That's Cabin 7. It's actually occupied at the moment. Has been for several years. We have similar properties available, though." "Several years?" Maria tried to keep her voice casual. "That's quite a commitment to solitude," David shrugged. "Some artists prefer it. Mr. Reed has been there since, let me check, 2016. He renews annually, pays on time, never causes problems. 2016 see. 1 year after the fire." "Reed?" Maria asked, her mouth suddenly dry. "Thomas Reed." "No, sorry, Jack Reed. But as I said, it's not available. I'd be happy to show you our other properties." Jack Reed. Not Thomas Donovan, but the timing was right, and people who wanted to disappear changed their names. "Actually," Maria said, her mind racing, "I'd like to send Mr. Reed a message. We have mutual friends in the photography world. Is that possible?" David hesitated. "We respect our client's privacy, but I can pass along a message with your contact information if you'd like. No guarantee he'll respond." Maria wrote her phone number and a simple note. I saw your work on Instagram before the account was deleted. I'm an admirer. Would love to discuss purchasing prints. She added her name, her real name, as a test. If this was Thomas, he would recognize it immediately. David promised to forward the message. Maria thanked him and left, her heart pounding in her chest. Now all she could do was wait. She didn't have to wait long. That evening, her phone rang. A blocked number. "Hello?" she answered, her voice trembling. Silence on the other end. Then, so quietly she almost missed it. "Why are you looking for me?" The voice was deeper than she remembered, rougher from disuse, but unmistakable. Thomas. Her son. Alive. "Thomas," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Is it really you?" Another long silence. Then, "You shouldn't have come. Please go home. Thomas. Please," Maria begged, gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. "I've mourned you for 9 years. 9 years of thinking you were dead. Please, just tell me why." "I can't do this," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "It's too dangerous. For both of us." "Dangerous? What are you talking about? Thomas, whatever trouble you're in, we can face it together. Your father and I, Dad's there too," Thomas interrupted, alarm evident in his tone. "No, he's in Seattle. We're not together anymore. After the fire, things fell apart." A sharp intake of breath on the other end. "I'm sorry, I never wanted to hurt you, either of you, but you have to go home and forget you saw that photo, forget you found me." "I can't do that," Maria said firmly. "I'm not leaving without seeing you, without understanding why my son let me believe he was dead for 9 years. The line went silent for so long that Maria thought he had hung up. Finally, "Cabin 7, Moraine Lake. Tomorrow at noon. Come alone. If I see anyone else, I'm gone." The line went dead. Maria barely slept that night. Her mind raced with questions. Why had Thomas faked his death? What danger was he in? How had he managed to pull off such an elaborate deception? The drive to Moraine Lake the next morning was both too long and too short. The landscape was breathtaking. Towering mountains, pristine forests, the lake itself a stunning shade of turquoise. But Maria hardly noticed. All she could think about was the fact that in a few short hours she would see her son again. Her son who had been dead, but wasn't. Cabin 7 was the last in a row of small wooden structures, set back from the lake, partially obscured by pine trees. It was exactly as it had appeared in the photograph, down to the distinctive stone chimney. Smoke curled from it now, suggesting someone was inside despite the mild weather. Maria parked her rental car and sat for a moment, gathering her courage. Then she walked slowly to the cabin door and knocked. No answer. She knocked again, louder this time. "Thomas?" "It's me." The door opened slowly. Standing before her was a man with a thick beard and longer hair than Thomas had ever worn, but the eyes, those were Thomas's eyes, looking back at her with a mixture of fear and resignation. "Mum," he said simply. Maria reached out a trembling hand to touch his face, to reassure herself that he was real and not some cruel hallucination. He flinched slightly but allowed the touch. "You're alive," she whispered, tears flowing freely now. All this time, Thomas stepped back, allowing her to enter the cabin. It was Spartan but neat. A small living area with a wood stove, a kitchenette, a desk covered in photography equipment, and doors leading to what she presumed were a bedroom and bathroom. The walls were lined with his photographs, stark, beautiful landscapes devoid of human presence. "Why?" Maria asked, the single word containing all her grief, all her confusion, all her anger. Thomas gestured for her to sit in one of 2 chairs by the wood stove. He remained standing, as if ready to flee at any moment. "It's complicated," he began, then stopped, seeming to realize the inadequacy of those words. "I got involved in something I shouldn't have." "What could possibly be so terrible that you had to fake your own death?" Maria demanded, her voice rising despite her efforts to stay calm. Thomas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made Maria's heart ache. "During my sophomore year, I started dating a girl named Eliza. She was brilliant, beautiful, passionate about politics. I fell hard." Maria nodded. Thomas had mentioned a girlfriend in their phone calls, though he'd never gone into detail. "What I didn't know," Thomas continued, "was that Eliza was involved with a group, activists they called themselves. But their methods went beyond protests and petitions. They were planning something big, something dangerous. By the time I realized what was happening, I was already implicated. Implicated in what? Maria asked, dread building in her stomach. Thomas looked at her directly for the first time. They were planning to hack into government systems, not just to protest or make a statement, but to release classified information. Information that could put people in danger. Eliza's father worked for the Department of Defense. She had access to his credentials. Maria struggled to reconcile this with the Thomas she had known, her thoughtful, ethical son who had always stood up for what was right. "And you were part of this?" "No," Thomas said vehemently, "at least not willingly. But I knew about it. And when I tried to back away to convince Eliza to stop, she threatened to tell the others I was planning to turn them in. These weren't harmless college activists, Mom. Some of them had connections to much more dangerous groups. I was trapped." "So the fire," Maria began, the horrible truth dawning on her. "Was my way out," Thomas finished. "It wasn't planned. There was a real fire that night, electrical, in one of the rooms below mine. When I realized what was happening, I saw an opportunity. I grabbed my emergency cash, my passport, and I ran. I didn't tell anyone, not even Eliza. Everyone thought I was one of the victims. But the DNA," Maria pressed, "they confirmed it was you." Thomas looked down. "One of the actual victims was about my size. I placed my student ID near the body, my wallet. Things that would survive the fire, but would lead them to believe it was me. I knew they'd do DNA testing, but I also knew how it worked. They'd compare it to samples from my hairbrush, my toothbrush. So before I left, I switched those with my roommate's. He was away that weekend. His DNA wouldn't match anyone in the system, but it would be close enough to yours and Dad's to seem like a familial match, especially with my ID found nearby." Maria felt sick. The premeditation required, the cold calculation. This didn't sound like her son at all. "You let us think you were dead. For 9 years. "I had to," Thomas insisted. "If the group thought I was alive, they would have come after me. And if I had contacted you, they might have come after you too. It was safer for everyone if Thomas Donovan was dead." "So you became Jack Reed?" Thomas nodded. "I made my way to Canada, lived off the grid, worked odd jobs for cash. Eventually, I saved enough to rent this place, to buy camera equipment. Photography had always been a hobby. It became my salvation. And my livelihood. And the Instagram account? Why take that risk?" Maria asked. "Stupidity," Thomas admitted. "Pride, maybe. I was careful. No selfies, no personal information. But I got sloppy with that cabin shot. I didn't notice my reflection until after I posted it. And then your comment came through and I panicked." Maria tried to process everything she was hearing. Her son had been alive all this time, hiding while she visited an empty grave every Sunday for 9 years. While her marriage fell apart from the strain of grief, while her life narrowed to a pinpoint of pain. "Do you have any idea what we went through?" she asked, anger finally breaking through the shock. "Your father and I, we were destroyed. Our marriage didn't survive your death. I couldn't work, couldn't function. For years." Thomas's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I never wanted to hurt you, but I was terrified. They had made threats against my family if anyone talked. And once I had committed to being dead, I didn't know how to come back. How do you return from the grave after a year? After 5? What would happen to me legally? I'd committed fraud, interfered with a police investigation. I might go to prison." "So you just stayed dead," Maria said flatly. "I convinced myself it was better this way, that you would heal eventually, that you and Dad would move on." Thomas's voice broke. "I see now how wrong I was." They sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the crackling of the fire in the wood stove. Outside, the light began to fade as afternoon turned to evening. Maria studied her son's face, older now, leaner, weathered by years of solitude and fear, but still recognizably Thomas. "What happens now?" she finally asked. Thomas shook his head. "I don't know. I never planned for this. For being found." "You can come home," Maria said. "Whatever happened, whatever trouble you're in, we can face it together. You can have your life back." "It's not that simple," Thomas argued. "Those people, they might still be out there. And legally, I'm a dead man. Coming back would mean explaining everything to the authorities. I could face serious charges." "We'll get a lawyer," Maria insisted. "People have faked their deaths before and returned. Yes, there might be consequences, but nothing as bad as living in exile forever." Thomas didn't look convinced. "And what about Eliza and her group? What if they're still active? It's been 9 years, Maria pointed out. College activists move on. They graduate, get jobs, start families. Whatever they were planning back then is long over. Unless they succeeded, Thomas said grimly. Unless whatever they were planning actually happened, and I'm still a loose end they'd rather tie up permanently. Maria stood up, frustration mounting. So what's your alternative? Hide in this cabin forever? Keep running? That's not living, Thomas. He had no answer for that. Night had fallen completely by now. Maria glanced at her watch. She had a long drive back to Calgary in the dark. I should go, she said reluctantly. But we're not finished with this conversation. Are you coming back tomorrow? Thomas asked, sounding suddenly younger, uncertain. Maria looked at her son, her alive, breathing son, and knew she couldn't leave him again. Not now. I'm staying in Calgary for as long as it takes. We need to figure this out together. They agreed to meet again the next day. Maria hugged Thomas before leaving, holding him tightly as if he might disappear again the moment she let go. He felt thinner in her arms than she remembered, but solid, real. The drive back to Calgary was surreal. Maria's mind kept replaying the conversation, trying to reconcile the Thomas she had known with this man living in self-imposed exile. How much of his story was true? How much was justification for an impulsive, terrible decision made by a frightened young man who then found himself trapped by his own lies? Back at her hotel, Maria called James. She had promised Thomas she wouldn't tell anyone about him yet, but she needed to talk to someone about what she had discovered. I found the cabin, she told James carefully. The one from the photo. And? James asked, tension evident in his voice. It's beautiful. Remote. I can see why an artist would choose it. Maria chose her words carefully, dancing around the truth without actually lying. Maria, James said gently, did you find what you were looking for? She hesitated. I found something important. I need to stay a few more days to be sure. James sighed. Just be careful. With the cabin, with the wilderness, with your heart. I will, she promised. Maria met Thomas at the cabin every day for the next week. They talked for hours, filling in the missing years. Thomas told her about his journey north after the fire, his odd jobs in small towns, his eventual settlement in the art community around Banff. Maria told him about her grief, about James moving to Seattle, about her slow, painful rebuilding of a life without her son. Gradually, a plan began to form. Thomas would return. Not immediately, but soon. They would consult a lawyer first, prepare for the legal consequences. They would tell James he deserved to know his son was alive, but no one else until they had a clear path forward. What about the danger? Maria asked. From Eliza's group? Thomas seemed less concerned now. I've been doing some research online. Eliza Johnson now works for a tech company in California. She's married, has a child. Whatever radical plans she had in college, she's moved on, and I haven't found any evidence that the hack they were planning ever happened. So it was all for nothing, Maria said, not bothering to hide the bitterness in her voice. 9 years of grief. For nothing. Thomas had no defense against that truth. On her last day in Canada, Maria drove Thomas to Calgary. He had agreed to return to the States with her, to begin the process of reclaiming his life. They had decided to fly to Seattle first, to tell James in person. Thomas was terrified at the prospect, but knew he owed his father that much. The flight was tense. Thomas had not been in a crowd in years and was visibly anxious. He used his Jack Reed passport, the identity he had carefully built over 9 years, but kept his head down, afraid of being recognized despite the beard and long hair. James was waiting for them at his apartment. Maria had called ahead, telling him only that she had something important to share and that he should be sitting down when they arrived. When James opened the door and saw Thomas standing beside Maria, he went completely white. For a moment, Maria feared he might collapse. Then, with a cry that contained 9 years of grief and shock and sudden, overwhelming joy, James pulled his son into his arms. The reunion was raw and overwhelming. James alternated between crushing Thomas in desperate embraces and stepping back to stare at him in disbelief, as if he might vanish again at any moment. How? Was all James could manage at first, the single word carrying the weight of nearly a decade of mourning. They sat in James's living room as Thomas repeated his story, the relationship with Eliza, the dangerous plot, the opportunistic escape during the fire. James listened in stunned silence, occasionally shaking his head or wiping away tears. I should be furious with you, James finally said when Thomas finished. "Part of me is, but mostly I'm just, God, Thomas, you're alive." It was strange, Maria thought, watching her ex-husband and her son together. The family they had once been was gone forever, fractured by grief and time. Yet here they were, the three of them, bound by something that transcended even the devastation of the past 9 years. "What happens now?" James asked, echoing the question Maria had posed in the cabin. Thomas looked between his parents, these two people who had given him life and then mourned his false death. "I want to come home," he said simply, "whatever that means now." The legal complexities were daunting. They consulted with a lawyer the following day, a specialist in criminal defense recommended by one of James's colleagues. The news was mixed. "Faking your own death isn't illegal per se," the lawyer explained, "but the fraud involved, the insurance payout, the interference with the investigation, those carry potential penalties." Princeton had received a substantial life insurance payout after Thomas's death, which had gone toward the Memorial Scholarship. The fire investigation had been closed years ago, but reopening it would reveal Thomas's deception. "And there's the matter of Jack Reed," the lawyer continued. "Using a false identity, working under a false name, crossing borders with fraudulent documents, these are serious issues." "So what's our best approach?" James asked, the practical side of him taking over. "Voluntary disclosure," the lawyer advised. "We approach the authorities proactively with a complete and cooperative story. We emphasize the threat Thomas believed existed, his youth and fear at the time of the decision, and his voluntary return now. It won't eliminate consequences, but it will mitigate them." Thomas nodded, resigned. "And what kind of consequences are we talking about? Potentially probation, fines, community service, possibly some jail time, though I think we can make a strong case against that given the circumstances. The publicity will be its own punishment." The publicity. Maria hadn't even considered that aspect. Of course, Thomas's return would make the news. The Princeton student who rose from the ashes 9 years after a tragic fire. It was too sensational for the media to ignore. "What about the other families?" Maria asked suddenly. "The ones who lost children in the real fire? Learning that Thomas escaped while their children died, it will reopen all those wounds." The room fell silent. None of them had an answer for that. They decided to move forward with the disclosure process. The lawyer would contact the relevant authorities, Princeton Campus Police, the local prosecutor's office, the insurance company, and arrange for Thomas to surrender himself and provide a full statement. In the meantime, Thomas would stay with James in Seattle. Maria returned to New Jersey to prepare for whatever might come next. They agreed to tell no one else about Thomas's return until the legal process was underway. The night before Maria's flight home, the three of them had dinner in James's apartment. It was the first time they had sat around a table as a family in nearly a decade. The conversation was stilted at times, natural at others. They carefully avoided the most painful subjects: the divorce, the years of grief, the empty grave that still waited in the cemetery back home. As they were clearing the dishes, Thomas paused, a plate in hand. "I saw the Instagram posts," he said quietly, "from both of you. All these years." Maria and James exchanged a glance. They had both maintained Instagram accounts, sharing glimpses of their separated lives. Maria had posted photos of Thomas's grave, of the memorial scholarship ceremonies, of the grief support group she attended. James had been more reserved but had marked the anniversaries with old family photos and brief, heartfelt captions. "I told myself I shouldn't look," Thomas continued, "that it was too dangerous, but I couldn't help it. I needed to see you even from a distance. I watched you grieve, and I did nothing. I can never make that right." Maria took the plate from his hands and set it down. "No, you can't," she agreed, her voice gentle but firm. "Those years are gone. We can't get them back. But we have now, and whatever comes next, that's what we focus on." Thomas nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I don't deserve this chance." "Maybe not," James said, joining them. "But you have it anyway. That's what family means." The three of them stood in the small kitchen, arms around each other, a broken family finding its way toward something new. The legal process unfolded gradually over the following months. Thomas surrendered to authorities in New Jersey, accompanied by his lawyer. The story broke immediately, just as they had feared. "Dead student returns after 9 years," screamed the headlines. Reporters camped outside Maria's house and called James incessantly at his Seattle office. The prosecutor initially took a hard line, speaking of wasted police resources, and aggravated identity fraud. But as the full story emerged, the threats Thomas had perceived, his youth and fear, his voluntary return, public sentiment began to shift. The narrative changed from heartless son fakes death to young man trapped by fear returns home. The insurance company was less forgiving. They demanded full repayment of the death benefit plus interest, a sum that would bankrupt both Maria and James. The lawyer negotiated a settlement. Thomas would repay the principal amount through a structured payment plan over 10 years. Princeton's response was measured. The university issued a statement expressing shock and relief at Thomas's reappearance and promising full cooperation with authorities. The families of the other fire victims were another matter entirely. Eleanor Rice, whose daughter Jessica had died in the same fire, gave a scathing interview to a national newspaper. "While I would never wish the loss of a child on anyone, I can't help but feel betrayed," she said. "For 9 years, the Donovans have been part of our grief community. We supported each other through the worst pain imaginable, and all that time their son was alive and well in Canada. Our children don't get to come back." Maria understood the anger. She would have felt the same in Eleanor's position. She wrote a letter to each of the families, apologizing for her unwitting role in their renewed pain, but received no responses. The community that had sustained her through her darkest days was now closed to her. It was one of many prices they would pay for Thomas's return. In the end, Thomas pled guilty to reduced charges of obstruction and fraud. The judge, noting his voluntary return and the unique circumstances, sentenced him to 3 years probation, 400 hours of community service, and restitution to the insurance company. There would be no jail time. "You've already served 9 years in a prison of your own making," the judge remarked during sentencing. The court sees no benefit in further confinement. Life began to settle into a new pattern. Thomas moved back into Maria's house temporarily, sleeping in his old bedroom that had remained frozen in time since his departure for college 10 years earlier. The experience was surreal for both of them. Maria finally had her son back in the room she had preserved for him, and Thomas was surrounded by the artifacts of his former self, a person who no longer existed in many ways. James visited regularly from Seattle. Though he and Maria had no interest in reconciling romantically, too much had changed for both of them. They found themselves drawn together by their shared focus on helping Thomas rebuild his life. The process was not easy. Thomas had lived in isolation for so long that he struggled with the most basic social interactions. A trip to the grocery store could leave him anxious and overwhelmed. He jumped at unexpected noises and kept checking over his shoulder, old habits from years of looking for pursuers who had never actually been there. A therapist diagnosed him with PTSD and severe social anxiety. "He's been living in a state of hypervigilance for nearly a decade," she explained to Maria and James. "His brain has been rewired to perceive threats everywhere. It will take time to feel safe again." Thomas also had to rebuild his identity in a practical sense. Jack Reed needed to be dismantled, and Thomas Donovan resurrected. A decade of official records listed him as deceased. Restoring his social security number, getting a driver's license, opening bank accounts, each step was complicated by his unusual status. "It's like being a ghost trying to become solid again," Thomas remarked, during a particularly frustrating day of bureaucratic battles. Slowly, though, progress came. Thomas began working with a local conservation group as part of his community service, using his photography skills to document wildlife habitats. The physical outdoor work and minimal social demands suited him, and for the first time since his return, he seemed to find moments of peace. 6 months after his return, Thomas decided it was time to visit his own grave. Maria and James accompanied him to the cemetery on a crisp autumn day, the three of them standing awkwardly before the headstone that bore Thomas's name, birth date, and the date of the fire. "It's strange," Thomas said, staring at the granite marker. "Part of me did die that night. The person I was, the student, the son you knew, he's gone. I became someone else entirely." "And who are you now?" James asked quietly. Thomas considered the question. "I don't know yet. Neither Thomas nor Jack, or maybe both. I'm still figuring it out." The cemetery groundskeeper, who had come to know Maria well over the years, watched them from a distance with a puzzled expression. Later that week, the story of the resurrected son visiting his own grave made the local paper, bringing another round of unwanted attention. A year after Thomas's return, Maria decided to sell the New Jersey house. Too many memories, too much notoriety attached to the address now. She found a smaller place in a neighboring town, somewhere she could start fresh but still stay connected to her support network. Thomas moved into an apartment of his own, though he spent several nights a week at Maria's new place. He was gradually rebuilding his life. The photography skills he had honed during his exile were now his legitimate profession. A small gallery in New York had even expressed interest in exhibiting his Canadian landscapes. James remained in Seattle but visited monthly. Though their family would never be what it once was, they had found a new equilibrium, a way to be present in each other's lives again. One evening, as Maria and Thomas sat on her new porch watching the sunset, Thomas asked the question that had hovered unspoken between them since his return. "Do you think you'll ever really forgive me for what I did to you and Dad?" Maria considered her answer carefully. "I think forgiveness isn't a single decision. It's something I choose every day. Some days it's easier than others." Thomas nodded, understanding the honesty in her words. "And some days you can't. And some days I can't," Maria agreed. "But I love you every day." That never changed, not even when I thought you were gone. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell. Mother and son, both forever changed by the 9-year lie, but finding their way forward together. The past couldn't be undone. The years of grief couldn't be erased. But each day brought them closer to a new truth, that sometimes even after the most devastating loss, there can be a kind of return. In the distance, a car's headlights appeared, growing brighter as it approached. James arriving for his monthly visit. Thomas stood to greet his father, and Maria watched her son, the son she had buried and mourned and miraculously regained, step into the light. It was not the family they had been. It was not the life any of them had imagined, but it was theirs now, imperfect and complicated and precious beyond measure. Maria thought of the refrains that had echoed through her grief for 9 long years. It was too late. There was no going back. He never wanted to return. None of them had been true. It had not been too late. There had been a way back, and in the end, he had wanted to return after all. Maria rose to join her son and her ex-husband in the driveway, the three of them converging from different directions, finding each other in the gathering darkness. Behind them, the porch light glowed, beckoning them home.